Hello everyone, good evening. Thank you for joining the live session for Introduction of History of India, Introduction to History of Architecture of India. This is an NPTEL course. The course instructor for this course is Professor Pushkar Sohni from IISER Pune, and I am Shreya Shukla. I am currently doing my PhD at IIT Roorkee, and I am the NPTEL TA for this course. So today we will be doing week 3 assignment 3, and just to make it clear again for whoever is joining live sessions for the first time, in these live sessions we only do previous year questions. We don't do this year's question. So I will be showing you solutions to a few of the previous year questions and explain a little about them to make it easier for you to go through the content. And these live sessions are hosted for two things. First is to show students the previous year questions, and secondly, if they have any doubts, they can ask us. So after I'm done with the question session, after I'm done with the previous year assignments, I would start the question answer round where you can ask your doubts to me. And yeah, without any further ado, we'll start with it. So the objective of this course was to give a brief introduction to the history of 5,000 years of architecture in India, and right from the Indus Valley civilization to the Delhi Sultanate to Mughals to Marathas. So far we have covered these points, and in week 3 the syllabus was about Mughal architecture and Maratha architecture mainly. So there were 5 lectures. First was the Mughal architecture part 1, in which it was talked in detail about the Mughal architecture starting from Babur and Humayun and Akbar. And in the Mughal architecture part 2, it was mainly focused on Shah Jahan and Aurangzeb, specifically talking about Shah Jahan, who is considered one of the pioneers of Mughal architecture. And then third lecture comprised of the imbrication of Sultanate and Maratha architecture, how Maratha architecture has been inspired from Sultanate architecture and why is that influence there. And then fourth is about the Maratha temple, which is very different compared to other temples in India. There are of course similarities, of course the main scheme is similar, but Maratha temples tend to use a lot of Mughal architecture elements in them or Sultanate elements in them. So that's what makes them a little different. And then the fifth lecture was about the overview. So without any further ado, I'll start with the question answer. Just to again clarify, there will be 10 questions which are called the verbal questions in the assignments, which are normal MCQ questions, and then 10 more questions in which there is an image that has been given and you will have to identify what building is that. So firstly I'll do the MCQs and then we will do the visual questions. So question number 1, the late Maratha temples of the 18th century were sometimes, number 1, similar to Bhumija and Shekhari types, based on South Indian types, circular in plan, or unlike temples in North India. So this is a little detail about the 18th century Maratha temples from the northwestern Deccan. So these temples were built largely by the Marathas, who had an ascendant power through the 18th century in the whole region. The Marathas have a very different tradition in that they have Bhumija style temples of the Yadavas, they have Sultanate architecture for 300 years, and then they have a revival from the North India, from Rajput lands, that they also try to incorporate. So Maratha architecture is very different, and it has a very different tradition in its architectural style because it is inspired by 3 styles. First was the Bhumija style temples of the Yadavas, because there used to be Yadavas built a lot of Bhumija style temples in these regions before it became a part of the Sultanate. And then this area saw Sultanate architecture for 300 years, and then when the Marathas again captured it, there was a revival of North Indian of temple styles inspired from the North Indian Rajput lands, which they also incorporated. So the Maratha style architecture of that time, around 18th century, was amalgamation of these 3 styles. In the 18th century, an attempt to revive a temple from that they know is very old, that is the Yadav Bhumija style. So what is, while it is Bhumija in its overt form, it is certainly not a Yadav temple. So in 18th century, they started reviving their temples and old temples, which were Yadav Bhumija temple. But during the reviving of the temples, you see that the overall form did not stay completely Yadav. It was more like a hybrid. The Yadavs built temples across Maratha heartland. These temples are not always in good repair. It brings good merit to repair such a temple. So what we see in these temples is that native style, and sometimes you see new temples or new shikharas on own temples in a Yadav style. So what happened was that the Yadavas built a lot of these temples in the uh, Maratha heartland, but these temples were not in a very good state. So they were either repairing those temples in their own native styles, Marathas, or they were building new shikharas with different accents on the old temples, which were in the Yadava style, which created these hybrid style temples. There were no artisans who understand how the Yadav style works. So the revival Yadav style or the revival Bhumija style is always a hybrid. And they have an import, which is the North Indian Shekhari style, and this gets used in very important pilgrimage spots like the Jyotirlings, for example. So, and then during their revival, they also import the North Indian Shekhari style in their temples, and especially for the pilgrimage spots like Jyotirling temples. And Shekhari style, cascading spires, which we had talked about in the week one, that Shekhari styles have the cascading spires. They producing in size coming all the way to the bottom, but sometimes toward the bottom it starts getting confused with Bhumija. So because the artisans really in that region at that time, they didn't know how to make a proper Bhumija temple or a proper Shekhari style temple, and often these artisans, they combined ideas. So what we see is usually that it starts with the Shekhari style, that there are different Shekhars cascading, but in the bottom of the Shikhara it becomes Bhumija style, in which you see different levels with different kutas. So our answer is, so the question was that the late Maratha temples of the 18th century were sometimes similar to Bhumija and Shekhari, based on South Indian temples, circular in plan, unlike temples in North India. So first of all, just to clarify it out, they were not circular in plan, they were square in plan, and they were not based on South Indian temples. They were inspired from the Yadava Bhuja style and the North Indian Shekhari style coming from the Rajput lands and the Sultanate architecture. And so our answer is A. They were similar to Bhumija and Shekhari. Question number 2. The architecture of the late Mughals is characterized by chhatris or kiosks, Bangla roofed pavilions, balustered columns, or all of the above. So here the question is specifically asking architecture of late Mughals. So the chain of rule that starts, the Mughal Sultanate starts with Babur, and then Humayun, then Akbar, then Shah Jahan, and then Shah Jahan's Jahangir, then Aurangzeb. So Babur, Humayun and Akbar are considered in the start of it, but the late Mughals are considered from Shah Jahan. So the architecture, the question is specifically asking about the architecture of late Mughals, which starts with Shah Jahan. So talking about it, so one of the greatest Mughal builders was the Emperor Shah Jahan, who is credited with building Taj Mahal and a city in Delhi that he called Shahjahanabad. The Mughal emperor did not sit on a throne, which was like a seat, but a throne which was a platform called the Takht. Above this platform, we see a curvy linear roof, and you can see that in the image I have added here. And this is called a Bangla roof, which is a curved roof that Mughal buildings started getting associated with. And then Shah Jahan builds a number of buildings in Red Fort at Agra, and he builds a whole set of pavilions and pavilions on either side, which have curvy linear roofs called the Bangla roofs. So the Bangla roof idea got incorporated in the Mughal architecture, with the Takht having the roof of Bangla roof. But then Shah Jahan started incorporating this Bangla roof idea of a curvy linear roof idea in other buildings, especially over the pavilions in his forts also. Then Another element that Shah Jahan introduced in his buildings was the baluster column, and I have added one image of the baluster columns. You can see the columns there. The earliest extant examples of Mughal baluster columns are found in solely in Shah Jahan's contributions to the three great fortress palaces of Agra, Lahore, and Delhi. So these baluster columns are were by Shah Jahan specifically. They're seen in his architecture during his reign only, and they are present in all the three great fortresses: Agra Fort, Lahore Fort, and the Red Fort in Delhi. Then thirdly, Chhatris, which was an Indian element, became hallmark of Mughal architecture during the reign of Akbar. So during the reign of Akbar, he had a really good relationship with the Rajputs. So Chhatri was got amalgamated in Mughal architecture from the reign of Akbar, and it started with Ajmer, Palace of Akbar in Ajmer. And however, this Chhatri idea got carried over to the later Mughal periods also. So the question was asking that the architecture of the late Mughals uh, the architecture of the late Mughals is characterized by chhatris or kiosks, Bangla roofed pavilions, baluster columns. So they're not asking specifically that what were the things that came in during the late Mughal time. They're asking what were the things prevalent in the late Mughal time. So our answer will be all of the above. Although the Chhatris started with Akbar, but they were still prevalent in the late Mughal architecture also. And Bangla roofs were also common in Mughal and Rajput architecture of northern India. And they're called Bangla roofs because their history can be traced back to the uh, straw roofs in the rainy regions of Bengal. So they used to build these straw roofs in rainy regions of Bengal so that the rain does not get hold, and that's where the term Bangla roof comes in because of its shape, which resembles that. Coming to question number 3, the palaces of the Rajputs and the Marathas in the 18th century were based on ancient Hindu architecture, were influenced by Mughal architecture, were based on domestic vernacular architecture, or none of the above. So, after the Mughals, most of the princely states in India, that means the states that were under the Indian kings or the Hindu kings usually, they started building in the style of Mughals. And the architectural style of the Mughals, the vocabulary that the Mughals used in their architecture, it was replicated by Rajputs and Marathas because they were mostly ruling in the parts of India, by all kings, large and small, across India. And Mughals and Rajputs and Marathas are often identified as the people who embraced the Mughal architecture style, and they are incorporated in their architecture during their periods. But it was not accepted by all the princely states or all the kings. But however, Rajputs and Marathas are known to have accepted the Mughal architectural style in their architecture style too. So, Mughals also had a whole string of cousins, the Rajputs, who were their first and second cousins from the time of Akbar and Jodha onwards, and a lot of these Rajput princes grew up in the Mughal court. Similarly, a lot of Mughal princes were sent to the Rajput courts, and thus the visual vocabulary of the Mughals and Rajputs were the same imperial architectural vocabulary. The fort of Amer, I have added the image of the fort of Amer here, it's in Jaipur, is one example of a building, a Rajput building influenced by Mughal architecture, that shows the connection between the Rajput and the Mughal. So the reason that the Rajputs used Mughal architecture in their buildings also was because they had good relationship with the Mughals during the reign of Akbar, when they started exchanging princesses and marrying their princesses into between Mughals and Rajputs, and that's when this whole thing started exchanging. The idea of architecture vocabulary also got exchanged between them, and during the time of Marathas, it, the the Mughals were a contemporary, and although there most of the architecture of Marathas has been influenced by the sultanates, the regional sultanates at that region, the Bahmani sultanates, but the Mughals still had an influence over it because the architecture style of India at that point, that the Mughal architectural style that was prevalent at that point, it represented the uh, political power. So I think that is why they also incorporated it in their style. So the answer is that the palaces of the Rajputs and the Marathas in the 18th century were influenced by Mughal architecture. Question number 4. Muharram processions in the western Deccan carried taziyas that resemble the tomb of Hussein at Karbala, the tomb of Gizu Daraz in Gulbarg, the Taj Mahal, the indigenous temple of the Marathas. So these are few of the examples of around 18th and 19th century Maratha temples, which have heavily borrowed from Mughal architecture in the sense that the Ambalika on the top of Shikhar has been replaced by domes. We see small minarets here, and then there are different arches being used. So, this is a typical example of Maratha temples during the 18th and 19th century. Now, this is what the tazia, these are the examples of taziyas that are used in Muharram processions. So, what is Muharram? It's an Islamic festival, not actually a festival. The morning of Muharram is a set of religious rituals observed predominantly by Shia Muslims, largely during the month of Muharram, the first month of the Islamic calendar. These rituals commemorate the death of Hussein ibn Ali, grandson of the Islamic prophet Muhammad and third Shia Imam. Tazia is a miniature replica of the tomb of Imam Hussein. Tazia is a structure made of bamboo decorated with colorful paper and fabric, and it is usually brought home between the first and the ninth day of the Muharram. In the early 20th century, the Muharram procession in the Deccan part of India was part of a secular celebration. Muharram was not exclusively Muslim, it was also celebrated as Imam Jayanti in Bombay. And there are a lot of accounts of a carnival like atmosphere during Muharram in which these big taziyas were taken out in procession and immersed into the water eventually. It was a regional style, not limited to religion. It was a regional style. The style that these taziyas were built in the Deccan region was a regional style, and it was not limited to religion, but it was something that everybody was doing in that area. These style marked power, piety, and religious devotion, whether it was a temple or a Muharram procession. So these taziyas of Muharram procession, they resemble the shikharas of Maratha temples because that was the style in that region. That was the style of the region of the Deccan area at that time, and it did not matter what was the religion. It mattered. This style became the symbol of power and religious devotion. So it was used alike, whether it was a temple or a Muharram procession. So our answer is Muharram processions in the Western Deccan carried taziyas that resemble the indigenous temples of the Marathas. Question number 5. The common type for a building plan called the Husht Bihisht comprised A. A circular room with radiation arms. B. 4 sets of rooms in corners connected by large divans and galleries. C. A building set in a garden. And D. All of the above. So the question is that a building plan which is called Husht Bihisht, what is Husht Bihisht comprised of? I'll quickly explain about it. So this image you see, it's plan of the Taj Mahal. This is a typical Husht Bihisht plan. So Husht Bihisht plan, In Hashtubish plan, there are block of rooms in the four corners of the buildings, and in the middle of each facade is an entryway which is called the Ivan that leads straight into the central space. So you see this plan, we have four rooms in the end, and then each of these rooms have one in corners of the building, in the middle of the facade is one entryway that leads to the central space. So in architecture, a hushed behest, which literally means eight heavens in Persian, is a type of floor plan consisting of a central hallway surrounded by eight rooms. So the earliest recognized example, which is Iranian architecture, is traced to the time of Persianate Timurid Empire. The term was used in Persian literature as a metaphorical image, but was later notably used in a poem by Indian poet Amir Khusro. In the architecture of the Persianate Mughal Empire, hushed behest was the favorite plan for gardens and pavilions as well as for mausoleums, seen as a funerary form of pavilion. These were planned as square or rectangular buildings divided into 9 sections with a central domed chamber surrounded by 8 elements. Later, developments of the hushed behest divided the squares at 45-degree angles to create a more radial plan, which often also includes chamfered corners, examples of which can be showed in Todermal's Baradari at Fatehpur Sikri, Humayun's tomb. Each element of the plan is reflected in the elevations and ivans and the corner rooms, expressed through smaller niched arches. Such structures were often topped with chhatris, small pavilions at each corner. Taj Mahal is also an example of it. So earlier, when it started, the hushed behest was incorporated in Mughal architecture in India. So they had a grid of 9 squares, a square plan with 9 grids, and then the center was the main central area in which it was connected with the other 8 rooms. However, with time, what happened was that the 4 squares at the edge, they were inclined at 45-degree plan, like you see in the plan of Taj Mahal. It is inclined at 45 degrees and it creates a more radial kind of plan, but it is still inspired with the hushed behest plan. So our answer is a common type of building plan, which is called the hushed behest or hushed behest, comprised of 4 sets of rooms in corners connected by large ivans and galleries. So there are 4 sets of rooms. Again, seeing the image, 4 sets of rooms in the end. All of these rooms are connected with galleries to the central space, and this central space will have a large dome on above, and also all these elements, all these other rooms will have often topped with chhatris and smaller pillar pavilions at each corner. Question number 6. Early Maratha architecture was similar to Mughal architecture, Yadava architecture, Sultanate architecture, Rashtrakuta architecture. So early Marathas were from 16th to 17th century, and they were contemporary with the great Mughals. The architectural idiom, and the architectural idiom that they follow, the Marathas follow, is of the Deccan Sultanates, and which were the Adil Shahs of Bijapur, Nizam Shahs of Ahmednagar, Qutub Shahs of Golconda, and the Sultanate that preceded all of them, the Bahmanis of Bidar and Gulbarg. So Marathas had a few Mughal architectural elements in their architectural vocabulary, but they were mostly inspired by, like I explained in the starting questions, that it was Bhumija styles and North Indian regions of Rajput regions, and most importantly the sultanates, because the Deccan Sultanate was like sultanates ruled there for around 300 years, and then that is the reason that all those things got incorporated in the early Maratha architecture very much. A few of the examples of how the Sultanate architecture got translated into early Maratha architecture are that use of a corbelled dome and with 4 finials at 4 corners, and it came in the Sultanate architecture, and then that same idea of corbel dome was later used in by Maratha temple builders. Then Amlakas, in Maratha period, the Amlakas on the top of the shikhar, uh, which had an umbrella-like shape, it got transformed into domes. And the reason is that the dome has been used by the sultanates for at least 300 years before that, and the builders knew how to make domes, and they thought that this is what goes on top of the building. Whether it is a what religion it belongs to does not matter, but what goes on top of the building is a dome. So the builders knew that, so that's how the Amlaka actually transformed into domes into Maratha temples. And then the motifs that Maratha temples use are very similar that were found in the Sultanate buildings at that time. Then another very important thing was the memorials or tombs. And so there are memorials and tombs which are placed around the temple of Greeneshwar. And there are a lot in Khuldabad, a few kilometers away from Khuldabad, there are a lot of stains in the Deccan which are buried, and it is around these stains that a lot of rulers were also buried. So the idea that a holy place has divine power and you have a burial or a memorial to yourself around such a place, that is something that was picked up by Marathas from the Sultanates, and so the Marathas also created memorials or tombs for important figures in their time, which was completely taken from the Sultanates. So our answer is early Maratha architecture was similar to Sultanate architecture. Question number 7. The study of Sultanate, Mughal, Maratha, Rajput architecture as a single complex demonstrates that architecture is an expression of political power, the movement of ideas and people across a region, uniformity of architectural ideas across India, and D, all of the above. So when we study it as a whole complex, the Sultanate architecture, the Mughal architecture, the Maratha architecture, and the Rajput architecture, the 4 of these things which have been majorly covered in the syllabus of this course, when we study this as a whole complex, we understand that architecture does not really correlate, because we see a lot of examples or styles that are common to both, be it Hindu rulers or be it Muslim rulers. Then you realize that architecture becomes an expression of political power. It is not just about religion, it is more about political power. So the grander you build, the more things you build, architecture becomes a sign of that. And the movement of ideas and people across regions. So of course, when the kingdoms expand, when a specific region will have multiple rulers who have multiple styles, and then these people also travel back and come back, they bring ideas from different places. uh, for example, the sultanates in the Deccan region, they brought ideas from Gujarat, from Rajput architecture, and they brought them with them in that region. Mughals brought the ideas from uh, Samarkand, from where Babur came. So the ideas, they travel with people across region, and when people move from one region to another, what they see they want to incorporate there in their own places, so they use that. So architecture is heavily derived by the movement of ideas and people across region. If one person goes to another place and he likes that thing, that person brings that idea and that person tries to use that in their architecture also, and that is the case with common man also, and that was heavily the case during the whole ruling times of sultanates, Mughals, Marathas, and Rajputs. Third, a uniformity of architectural ideas across India. So because of the exchange of ideas and because of different empires expanding and contracting and different fights, there is a slight uniformity in architectural ideas across India. For example, like it started with The Buddhist temples, they used to the there are no Buddhist temples as such, but the idea that started with Buddhist viharas, from where the Hindu temple, the idea of a place of God dedicated, which was a hut kind of structure, which through time became that God is divine, so that place has to be like a palace rather than just a hut. So that idea that God is divine and it has to be magnificent, it has to be huge. So whether it is which religion it is does not matter. The religious places across all religions, they started building grand uh, places dedicated to God, because God is supposed to be divine. So he's supposed to live. That the place that is dedicated to them is supposed to live in that. Secondly, it has architecture has always been a symbol of political power, which means that to show your power, you build monuments that are the more magnificent the monument, it shows your power that way. For example, if that is translated in modern times, even for example, the building of skyscrapers, it's a show of economic power and political power. The bigger the building you build, you have the better economic power. So that's why all the countries right now are competing with building the highest skyscraper. So this is a modern example of it, but it's the same idea, that architectural ideas, that grandeur is associated with political power, and then ideas travel through the different regions. All of these happen in the terms of architecture. So our answer will be B, all of the above. The study of the whole Sultanate, Mughal, Maratha, Rajput architecture as a single complex. It denotes that architecture is an expression of political power, that the movement of ideas and people across region, and that there is a uniformity of architectural ideas across India. Question number 8. Taj Mahal is built of sandstone, marble, brick clad with marble, sandstone clad with marble. So we all know that Taj Mahal currently is one of the seven wonders of the world, and it is one of the most renowned buildings in India right now and in the world itself. And the entire building is in marble, which was a very peculiar sign of Shah Jahan. So Mughals before Shah Jahan, they used to have marbles in special places or important places, and Akbar mostly used sandstone in his buildings, and marble was used for specific regions or places of importance. However, Shah Jahan wanted marble in everywhere. So his style was that marble was grandeur for him, and he wanted marble everywhere. So in whatever uh, quantity or he could have the building in marble, he tend to have that. So Taj Mahal is one such example of Shah Jahan architecture during Shah Jahan, that the entire building is covered in marble. So Taj Mahal is considered to be one of the wonders of the world, but the building does not stand in isolation. It is in the same lineage of buildings that we have seen in as Humayun's tomb and Safdarganj tomb in Delhi. This building is not built in marble, but it is clad in marble, because marble is not a building material. So this entire building, which is called that Puri Sangamarmar ki bani hai, like it's made out of marble. It's not made out of marble, it is clad in marble, because marble is not a building material. Taj Mahal is a huge structure, and it is a load bearing structure which is made in bricks. It's a load bearing brick structure. So the building is built in bricks, but the marble is used as a cladding material for ornamentation. But the entire building from the platform to the Ivan, to the decorations, to the ornamentation, to the domes, to the chhatris, to the minarets, everything is clad in marble. So it is also unusual. Taj Mahal also stands a little different from compared to other Mughal buildings. because it is not in the middle of a Mughal garden but at the end of it. Usually buildings are kept in the middle of the Mughal garden, but Taj Mahal is kept at the end of Mughal garden on the banks of Yamuna River. So our answer is that the Taj Mahal is built of brick and it is clad with marble. It is not built with marble. Marble is not a material. It's not a building material, and this Taj Mahal has massive walls, huge dome supported on it, and it's a load-bearing structure made with bricks, and entire building is cladded with marble. Question number 9. Architecturally, pick the odd one out. Uh, Akbar's tomb, Sikandra. Humayun's tomb, Delhi. Taj Mahal, Agra. And Bibi ka Maqbara, Aurangabad. So, excuse me, just a second. Hello? Yeah, sorry, I had a issue and I was trying to resolve it. So, architecturally, pick the odd one out. Akbar's tomb, Sikandra. Humayun's tomb, Delhi. Taj Mahal, Agra. And Bibi ka Maqbara, Aurangabad. So, we all know how Taj Mahal looks like, and so the answer actually is Akbar's tomb, Sikandra, and I have added details about Akbar's tomb, Sikandra, in the next slide. So the reason that it is the odd one out is because Humayun's tomb Taj Mahal and Bibi ka Maqbara all follow the same architectural vocabulary in the sense that there will be a square plan with a dome on top and with a minaret around them, and then different size Ivans. So all these three buildings, Humayun's tomb, which was built by his wife, Taj Mahal by Shah Jahan, and Bibi ka Maqbara Aurangabad by Aurangzeb. All these three buildings have the same architectural visual style. However, Akbar's tomb Sikandra, which was built by Jahangir in Uttar Pradesh, has a very different architectural style. So Akbar's tomb is the mausoleum of the third and greatest Mughal Emperor Akbar. It was built in 1605 by 1613 by his son Jahangir, and it is situated on 119 acres of grounds in Sikandra, a suburb of Agra, Uttar Pradesh, India. The building was constructed mainly from a deep red sandstone enriched with features in white marble. So the south gate is the largest with four white marble chhatri topped minarets, which are similar to those of Taj Mahal, and is the normal point of entry to the tomb. The tomb itself is surrounded by a walled enclosure, 105 meters square. The tomb building is a four-tiered pyramid surmounted by a marble pavilion containing the false tomb. The true tomb, as in the other mausoleums, is in the basement. The buildings are constructed mainly from a deep red sandstone enriched with features in white marble. Decorated inlaid panels of these materials and black slate adorn the tomb and the main gatehouse. Panel designs are also geometric, floral, and calligraphic. And the Buland Darwaza is inspired by this building. So Humayun's tomb is also built in red sandstone, and Akbar's tomb is also built in red sandstone. Taj Mahal and Bibi ka Maqbara are built in brick cladded with marble. So how Akbar's tomb then really differentiates with Humayun's tomb is that the Akbar's tomb is characterized by a huge Ivan, which was very common in the region, that region of UP, where huge Ivans or huge gateways were there, and these gateways were not common. These huge gateways were not excruciatingly common in other times. So the answer is Akbar's tomb, Sikandra. The question is that the Char Garh refers to, but I think there was a spelling mistake here. It's Cheher Bagh or the Char Bagh, not Char Garh. So the Char Bagh refers to four gardens: a garden with four kinds of trees, a circular garden, or a quadripartite garden. So talking about the Cheher Bagh or the Char Bagh style. So Cheher Bagh style was brought to India by Mughals, and it's a Persian style garden layout in which the main building is put in the center of the quadrilateral garden, and it is divided by walkways or flowing water into smaller parts. Humayun's tomb and Taj Mahal is the most famous example of this style. However, in Taj Mahal, the building is at the end near the edge of Yamuna rather than in the center. Babur, who brought this idea of Cheher Bagh from Persia and Samarkand to India, he mentioned in his autobiography that his interest in planning and laying out formal gardens placed within rectangular walled enclosures and divided into four quarters by artificial channels. So these gardens were called Cheher Bagh, four gardens, because of the symmetrical division into quarters. So our answer is it's a quadripartite garden, which means quadripartite in English means consisting of 4 parts. So the Sheher Bagh refers to a quadripartite garden. Now we are done with the verbal questions. Now we will start with the uh, visual questions. There are there are 10 visual questions which we will be doing today. So we have done 10 verbal questions. Now we will be doing 10 visual questions. And yeah, starting with this. So there is this image given, and you are asked to identify which is the building style. So we have options: Bhumija temple from Madhya Pradesh, 18th century; Bhumija temple from Madhya Pradesh, 12th century; Bhumija temple from Maharashtra, 18th century; or Bhumija temple from Maharashtra, 12th century. So this is actually an example of Bhumija temple from Maharashtra in 18th century, and I'll explain you why. When you closely look at this image and you see the shikhra on the right side of it, this is a typical Maratha style temple which in which they tried to incorporate Bhumija style architecture, and somehow it also has some vocabulary translating from Shikhari style. So when you look at this building clearly, you see that the shikhar is cascading, that there are other smaller shikhars in front of it, each getting smaller and cascading to it, which is a sign of a Shikhari style. However, when you see on the other side of this shikhar, you see in the bottom there are different levels with representation of aedicules of kutas, which is a Bhumija type architecture. And we just learned in the previous questions that in Maratha architecture, when they brought in the Maratha temple architecture, they had hybrid temples that were not exactly Bhumija temples, but were hybrid in a lot of ways. And another hybrid way was this, that it was a combination of a Shekhari and a Bhumija style, which was very prevalent in the Maratha architecture of the 18th century when Marathas were ruling that region. So the answer is Bhumija temple from Maharashtra, 18th century. Next is that this image has been given, and you are asked to identify the building. So yeah, so the options are Tomb of Akbar, Sikandra; Tomb of Ittimad ud Daula, Sikardara; Bibi ka Maqbara, Aurangabad; Char Minar, Hyderabad. So if you guys are familiar with other buildings, then you would able to identify it. But in case you are not, this is definitely not Char Minar, Hyderabad. This is not Bibi ka Maqbara, because Bibi ka Maqbara has been heavily inspired by Taj Mahal, cladded in marble. And then Tomb of Akbar I just showed you. So this is Tomb of Ittimad ud Daula, Sikardara. So it is a Mughal mausoleum in the city of Agra in Uttar Pradesh, and it is often described as a jewel box, and it is a tomb of it was built in around early 1600s, and this building is also in the middle of a garden, and this is also built in red sandstone with marble claddings, similar to Humayun's tomb. And it is situated at the bank of Yamuna, and this mausoleum is also located in the center of the Char Bagh or Cheher Bagh. or a quartite garden, and it is heavily in, heavy in ornamentation is there, very visible, and also you see the center with the Bangla roof or the big chhatri. That is something that has been inspired by the Rajputana architecture and which was translated here. So our answer is Tomb of Ittimad Uddaulah, Sikardara. Now this building is again given and you are asked to identify which building is it. So our options are Alai Darwaza, Fatehpur Sikri, Badshahi Mosque, Lahore, Tomb of Jahangir, Lahore, Mosque in the Taj Mahal, Agra. So the answer is it is a mosque. This is a picture of the mosque at Taj Mahal. So Taj Mahal is again one of the 7 wonders of the world, and this mosque is built there along with Taj Mahal, the mausoleum, because it has been observed that a mausoleum is built. Where a mausoleum is built, it should be accompanied by a mosque, and it is an important element of that. And this mosque was built by Isa Muhammad, and it faces the direction of Mecca, which is holy for Muslims. And it is built in red sandstone and entirely with domes in marble, and has a lot of carvings and detailings, and even phrases, lines from Quran have been carved in these walls. And yeah, so this is Mosque of Taj Mahal, Agra. So now this image has been given and you are supposed to identify which is it, and our options are Maratha temple, Rajput temple, Bengal temple, or a Tajia for Muharram. So this is actually an example of Maratha temple during the 18th and 19th century. And why we can identify that this is a Maratha temple is because it's a shikhara kind of style, and because it has a dome on the top of the shikhara, which was in the Maratha temples, and it was otherwise the other temples of other Indian or Hindu temples had amalika on top or shikharas on top, but not domes on top. But Maratha temples had dome on top because it was heavily inspired by the Sultanate architecture, and also the use of 4 minarets in temple shikharas is a common seen in Maratha temples, and these 4 minarets again come from the Sultanate architecture. So our answer is A, Maratha temple. Question number 15. This picture is again given and you are asked to identify what is the building, and the options are Palace at Orcha, Palace at Agra, Palace at Pune, Palace of Vijayanagar. So this is actually an image of Orcha Palace, or the Palace at Orcha, or it is a there is no knowing exactly. Um, that where the architectural style of this building comes from really, because it has huge amalgamations of Rajput architecture and the Mughal architecture. It it's one of the buildings in the whole fort complex, with fort, palaces, temples, and other buildings. It is located in Orcha in Madhya Pradesh, and it was built by Bundela Rajputs. This whole place in the early 16th century. However, the style of this uh, building, this palace at Orcha, it cannot really be exactly identified which it is, because it uses heavily the elements of Rajput architecture and Mughal architecture combined. We see that Chhatri becomes although it's a part of Rajput architecture and it comes from Gujarat, but it gets heavily translated into the Mughal architecture. Then we see these arches, then we see these other pavilions, and so this is how this palace actually really stands out, because it's an amalgamation of Rajput and Mughal architecture. So our answer is palace at Orcha. Now, next question is, identify the following, and the options are Alai Darwaza, Badshahi Mosque, Lahore, Akbar's tomb, Sikandara, Sikandara Mosque in the Taj Mahal, Agra. So the answer is Akbar's tomb, Sikandara. Actually, there are different images of Akbar's tomb, so I am also getting a little confused over here, because there are different images that have been used over here. I'll just give me a few minutes. So this is definitely a Mughal style architecture, and it's not a mosque, because mosques tend to have central domes and two smaller domes on the side. And this is not the mosque in Taj Mahal, because we have just seen that. And the Alai Darwaza at Fatehpur Sikri has a minaret uh, also there, along like I'm also getting a little confused here. So actually the answer is Akbar's tomb, Sikardara, but there are, I think, different buildings involved in it. But the architecture is still very typical of the other images that I have seen. Red sandstone, and then detailings in marble and carved detailings, and then having some of the elements above on it, or on top, or the top elements are usually in marble. For example, the images that I have seen, or the image that I also showed in the previous pictures, it had four minarets made out of marble on a building of red sandstone, which was heavily carved with, again, with marble. So I think this would be one of the few buildings, or one of the different angles of the similar building. So the answer is actually Akbar's tomb, Sikardara. Question number 17. Identify the following building, and the options are Moti Masjid, Delhi, Camp of Aurangzeb, Alamgir, Shahi Masjid, Lahore, and the tomb of Shahnawaz Burhanpur. So this is actually Moti Masjid, and it was built in 17th century around in inside the Red Fort complex in India. It was built by Aurangzeb, and it was also damaged during the siege of Delhi but it was also later restored by the British, and it is also clad in white marble, and it has floral carvings in it, and like Shah Jahan, Aurangzeb also liked having things in pure marble, because he also got Bibi ka Maqbara made, which was also a replica of Taj Mahal and all clad in marble, and then this Moti Masjid by Aurangzeb is also completely clad in marble. So it's not a small mosque, and like typical mosques, the direction of prayer is in the direction of Mecca, and yeah, they have smaller pillars on it, and I think the name Moti came from the design of the dome, which resembles, and then use of white marble. So that's how the name of Moti Masjid came to it. So the answer is Moti Masjid, Delhi. Now one option has been given. Again, a picture has been shown, and then options have been given to identify which mausoleum is this. So the options are Mausoleum of Afzal Khan, Mausoleum of Maloji Bhosle, Mausoleum of Shah Wali, Mausoleum of Muhammad Adil Shah. So like I talked heavily that how the Sultanate architecture inspired the Maratha architecture. So they took another huge aspect of Mughal architecture, Sultanate architecture, uh, which was having mausoleums for great eminent people. So this is actually the mausoleum of Maloji Bhosle, and he was grandfather of Shivaji, and he was the founder of Maratha Confederacy, and and he also served to the Ahmednagar Sultanate, and yeah, so this is actually a mausoleum dedicated to Maloji Bhosle, who was grandfather of Shivaji, but he also served in the Ahmednagar Sultanate. And if you can see that the idea of mausoleum is heavily inspired from the Sultanate architecture, from from the Islamic architecture. You can see the style is very similar, with a square building with a dome on top, but you see the very Indian elements in also this, like the use of chhatris and the um, window carvings and other things. So the answer is Mausoleum of Maloji Shah. Now, again a building has been given, and you are being asked to identify the building, and so like I talked before in few of the questions that Aurangzeb got Bibi Ka Maqbara built, which was replica or not a replica but heavily inspired by Taj Mahal. So this is actually Bibi Ka Maqbara. So our options here were Humayun's tomb, which we know what it looks like, Taj Mahal, Charminar, and Bibi Ka Maqbara. So the answer is Bibi Ka Maqbara, which translates to tomb of the lady. It is located in Aurangabad, and it was built by Aurangzeb. And it bears a resemblance to Taj Mahal, which was the mausoleum of Aurangzeb's mother, Mumtaz Mahal, built by his father Shah Jahan. And yeah, it has jali work, it has marble jali work, it is again a brick building clad in marble. There are arches inside the tomb, and the insides are heavily intricated, and again it is laid out in charbagh garden form. So yeah, so the answer is Bibi ka Maqbara. So again, one image has been given, and you are asked to here you are not asked to identify which building is this, but here you are asked to identify which of the statements is untrue. So the statements that have been given here are is that this temple is built in the Bhumija style. This temple is built by the Marathas. This temple is at least 800 years old, and this temple is one of the Jyotirlings. So you are supposed to identify uh, which one of the statement is wrong. So coming back to Bhumija style, this is definitely a Bhumija style building. And coming back to temple built by Marathas, so this is actually Krishneshwar Jyotirling in Maharashtra, and it's a Maratha temple only, so it was built by Marathas. And because it is a Jyotirling temple, so we know that the statement D is also correct, that Krishneshwar, it's a Jyotirling temple. Now the statement that it is at least 800 years old is wrong, because now that we have identified this building, that this is Krishneshwar Jyotirling temple, we know that it is located in Maharashtra and it was built by Maharashtra, and we can see very evidently that it is built in Bhumija style. So the reason that the statement is at least 8 years old wrong can be found out logically by the fact that the Maratha temple, that the Marathas started their reign in 17th century and 18th century, and the Maratha temple became prevalent, Maratha architecture became prevalent in the 18th century itself. So this cannot be 800 years old, because the logically, if we think of that, it cannot be 800 year old, because they started their architectural style in the 1800s itself. So the answer is that the statement the temple is at least 800 years old is untrue. So I'm done with the questions, and if anybody has any doubts, please ask. You can type it in the chat box. I will try to answer it best to my understanding and capacity. In case I will not be able to answer it, I will answer it in the next class. Sorry for any disturbances. I know my voice was also breaking in between a lot. So yeah. I have few questions. No voice. Oh, I'm sorry if the voice was not audible at that time. I hope it was audible now. And in case if the voice was inaudible during any of the questions, please let me know again. I will repeat that question again. Then there's a question by Nikhil. For the final, is there a need to read any particular book, or video lecture of Sir are enough? Video lectures of Sir would be enough, and I think Sir has also given a few reading books, but I think going through the lectures would be absolutely enough for the final exam. And Miss Purnima is asking, exam will be, no, the exam will be MCQ type as far as I know. I would just confirm it once before and I will let you know. But as far as I know, it's all MCQ type. It's not descriptive type. The assignments are also all MCQ type. If anybody has any questions regarding today's session, please let me know. College semester date and NPTEL exam date, what to do? You can, I think the date for the NPTEL cannot be changed, because people across the country would be giving that exam. So I think you will have to coordinate with your college only, if that's possible. Because NPTEL is being taken by students across India, so that I think cannot be changed. If anybody has any questions regarding the I'm sure Sir might have added a few books and references in his lectures in the end. You can check those out. Mr. Thirumal, I don't understand what you're saying. So, sir has suggested two books for reference. Book by Christopher Tadgill, History of Architecture in India, and then Indian Architecture by Percy Brown. So he has suggested these two books, but going through the content of the NPTEL course, I think would be enough for the exam. But of course, if you would like to learn more and like to learn in detail, you can go through these books. These two books are suggested by Professor Pushkar Sohani. If anybody has any questions regarding today's session or would like me to repeat any of the questions, please let me know. Uh, I am not able to understand what you are saying, Mr. Thirumal. I am allowing you to turn your microphone on if that will help you, because I'm not able to understand what you're typing. So, will any documents be required while filling the exam form? That I'm actually not aware of, Miss Sonam, because I am here as a TA, especially regarding the understanding of the course. These administrative ideas I am not very clear of. But if you want to know, you can actually email NPTEL and ask them directly. Yeah, I'll show the last slide. Yeah, would you like me to repeat this question, Miss Purnima? Okay. I'll write the name of the books here that are recommended by Professor Sohani. I'll just write it over here. These are the two books that have been mentioned by Professor Sohani. If anybody has any questions regarding the content of this week 3, please let me know. If anybody has any questions, you can please ask. If nobody has any questions, we can conclude the meeting also. If nobody has any questions, we can conclude the meeting. Please let me know. Or if you have any questions, please kindly type. I'll show the first three slides, Ms. Sonam. And Arya, you're asking what were the basic differences between all those architecture buildings? Which buildings are you talking about exactly? There is, of course, a lot of difference between all the buildings that have occurred during the different reigns of different empires. So you're asking me to repeat the first three questions. Okay, fine. The first question was the late Maratha temples of the 18th century were sometimes similar to Bhumija and Shekhari types. Were they based on South Indian temples? Were they based on were they circular in plan, or were they unlike temples in North India? So the answer to this is that they were similar to Bhumija and Shekhari types, and I have given a short description over here, added a short description over here. So these temples in 18th century by Marathas were built largely by Marathas and who ascended into power in 18th century. And they had a very different tradition of architectural style. They have Bhumija style temples of the Yadavas. They have Sultanate architecture for 300 years. And then they have a revival style from North India, from Rajput lands. So they have an amalgamation of these three different architectural styles in their buildings. So what happened that they also tried to revive a lot of Yadav Bhumija temples, but because the artisans did not exactly know how to that, so which created a lot of hybrid temples. And they imported North Indian Shekhri style into their temples also. Earlier, they used to have Yadav Bhumija temples under the reign of Yadavas, but they also incorporated Shekhari styles, and it was very common for Jyotirlings, the Shekhari style. However, the Shekhari style was also not purely Shekhari, it was often amalgamated with Bhumija style. So, our answer was that the late Maratha temples of the 18th century were sometimes they were similar to Bhumija and Shekhari types. We saw the example of Shekhari type and also a hint of Bhumija type in the last question we just saw of Jyotirling. Then question number 2 was architecture of the Mughals, late Mughals, is characterized by chhatris, kiosks, bangla roof pavilions, baluster columns, all of the above. So the question specifically talks about late Mughals, which means from Shah Jahan. So, chat, baluster columns and bangla roof pavilions were became a part of the architectural vocabulary of Mughals during the reign of Shah Jahan. While chhatris were introduced by Akbar, but they were still heavily used in the later Mughal period also. So Shah Jahan was considered one of the great Mughal builders, and the idea of Bangla roof was incorporated by him first in his throne, which is called a takht. It is not really a seat but a platform called takht. And then he started using this Bangla roof, this curvilinear roof, on a set of pavilions in the forts, especially at the Red Fort at Agra. And then he introduced these baluster columns in his buildings, and these are found solely during the reign in Shah Jahan's buildings. And these baluster columns have been used in palaces of Agra, Lahore, and Delhi. And then chhatris were, although were made a part of Mughal architecture during the reign of Akbar. However, chhatris were still found in the late Mughal architecture period. So the answer is all of the above. The architecture of late Mughals is characterized by chhatris, bangla roofed pavilions, baluster columns, all three of them. Then question number 3 was that the palaces of the Rajputs and the Marathas in the 18th century were based on ancient Hindu architecture, were influenced by Mughal architecture, were based on domestic vernacular architecture, or none of the above. So, after the Mughals, when the Mughals were defeated completely, most of the princely states in India, in the sense that most of the states in India which were ruled by kings or princes, they started building in the style of Mughals. And they started using the architectural vocabulary of the Mughals, and it was majorly replicated in the buildings by Rajputs and the Marathas. Although Rajputs and Marathas incorporated the Mughal style architecture in their buildings, not everybody else incorporated that style in their buildings. So the reason why that Rajputs have incorporated heavily in their architecture was because Mughals and Rajputs had a good relationship from the time of Akbar, because Akbar was married to a Rajput princess, and then few Mughal princes were sent to Rajput courts, and they had that, which led to exchange of ideas, and this is why they had a similar vocabulary. This is an image of Fort of Amir located in outskirts of Jaipur. It is an example of a Rajput building heavily inspired by the Mughal architecture. So our answer is that the palaces of the Rajputs and the Marathas in the 18th century, they were influenced by Mughal architecture. So I have repeated the first three slides, Ms. Sonam. And Arya, you're asking, what were the basic differences between all those architectural buildings, Mughals and Maharashtra? So, Mughal architecture was heavily inspired, or the idea of Mughal architecture, it came from the Persian architectural style and the architectural prevalent in Samarkand, from where Babur came. And so the Mughal architectural style brought in the Islamic elements along with them, and then they created those buildings in India. However, when they were building those buildings in India, they, because a lot of indigenous parts also started getting incorporated in them. Especially we see during the reign of Akbar and Shah Jahan that Rajput styles got incorporated into the Mughal architecture and others. So, if you're asking the difference between all those architecture buildings, first of all, Mughals were mostly towards the northern part of India, and the Maratha architecture, it was prevalent in Maharashtra. It was heavily inspired by Yadav Bhumija temple, the Sultanate architecture, and the Shekri style of Rajput temples. Some elements of Mughal architecture were incorporated in Maratha architecture, but they were very few. So the biggest difference would be in the religious buildings, although there would be similar things there are similar elements in the Maratha temples taken from the Sultanate and Mughal architecture, like minarets and other pots. It's clearly visible that they have still created a shikhra and not just a dome. So the places of worship, first of all, that distinguishes the Mughals and the Maharashtrian architecture or the Maratha architecture. We will have temples, Maratha temples, and then we will have mosques and other places. Coming back to fort, so coming back to other palaces and other things, they were the palaces were heavily inspired by the Mughals in both in Maratha and Rajputs, but still it held a lot of difference. But although there are also cases, for example, in the case of Orchha, which is a Rajputi palace, but it is still said that it cannot really be distinguished what is the particular style, because at that point a lot of those parts have been mixed up.
Thank you, ma'am.
If anybody has any other questions, please ask. If you don't have any questions, we can conclude the meeting. If nobody has any questions, we can conclude the meeting.